had a discussion with my grandfather in early 2012, which was the year he passed away, and I had intended to do a longer series, but shortly after the video was shot, he began getting sick and never fully recovered. But I got a couple sessions of me talking with him and asking him about the beginnings of the bank and the Great Depression, and he was able to share a lot of information and give some stories that he heard growing up and, some history. And so I hope you'll find this discussion interesting. I've got a couple of videos. I may end up releasing more videos later, but this is the first one of two longer videos that I'll be releasing in the coming days. And I'm hopeful that this will be enjoyable for you as it was for me to make it. I'm glad I was able to hang on to it and been waiting for a good time to release it, and I think now is as good a time as any. And so I hope you enjoy this first video on the beginnings of the bank.
How did the bank get started? Well, there was already a bank, as a matter of fact, in Waldo, established in 1898, called the Bank of Waldo. When Waldo was just getting started good, they had stores there, but they didn't have a bank till 1898. And the other notion of having a bank was made, the decision was made, let's say, with fear and trembling. Can Waldo actually support two banks? The people that were in the other bank, I dare say, said, we can't even support one bank very well here in Waldo. Who says we need another bank? Well, everybody wanted to have one, and I guess that may be the answer. We had a drugstore, and as a matter of fact, we had two drugstores. We had the Kitchens drugstore, and we had the Farmid drugstore. It was a Rexall drugstore, and every half a year or every year they'd have a big sale. And competition was really, we were competing in those days with Magnolia. Magnolia and Waldo were about the same size. Why was Waldo steal a run on Magnolia? Because we had the railroad and they didn't. They had a little old small L&N.W. railway over here, but we had the big hauler of freight, and it was a big thing, a big advantage to have. So it took a while to get that competition settled down. Now, the organization of the bank was done. A lot of people think that my grandfather, W.M. Fincher, and his father, who was W.T. Fincher, who built the first brick store in Waldo in 1880, that they were the prime movers of this. Well, that's not so. In the City Hall of Waldo, you'll see a large sign on a brick building that says, Merchants and Farmers Bank, authorized capital $50,000. That sign was put there by my maternal grandfather, Charles Clark, and his brother, Marvin. Marvin Clark became the first cashier of the bank. They used to name the People's Bank. They changed the name from Merchants and Farmers Bank. I found the stationery that they used before they ever organized and got a charter. But they did have a charter. And so what happened is there were two charters issued by the State Bank Department, one to the People's Bank and one to the Merchants and Farmers Bank. Charlie Clark, my grandfather, and his brother Marvin were the principal officers and principal stockholders in the bank. And Marvin Clark's wife was from a family that came all the way across the South building sawmills, and they'd cut out the virgin timber and move someplace else and build another sawmill. So I rather think that's where most of the money came from, and that is the Wainwrights, who built sawmills. And Marvin Clark, Charlie's brother, married Anna Wainwright. Well, they went in and tried to sell stock to everybody that would buy 5 shares or 10 shares. And a lot of people only owned a small portion of the bank. The large holders of stock were Anna Wainwright Clark, Marvin Clark, Charles Clark, and their father was Dr. A.F. Clark, who was a physician in Waldo, died in 1898 and is buried out in the Waldo Cemetery. So there were many other people that came in to buy small shares of stock, and among those were the Flahertys. Miss Kitty Flaherty had fortunate enough to have some minerals down in Claiborne Parish around Haynesville, Louisiana, and made a good deal of money off of oil. So she bought a pretty good position in People's Bank stock, and it came to be that after her death, her children, girls and boys, a large family, each owned a small amount of People's Bank stock. And it turned out to be hard stock to buy for yours truly. But when they finally sold the last of their stock, as these people began to pass out of the picture. There was Dr. Kitchens that had a small amount of stock. Captain Wade Kitchens in Magnolia was an attorney who was a congressman, a U.S. congressman. He was a captain, and he took a group of men over to France in World War II. J.E. Askew were principals in the Bank of Waldo. J.E. Askew was a vice president of the People's Bank, and he was also a vice president of the Bank of Waldo. They had stock in both banks. And incidentally, they were one of the few, maybe one of the only furnishers that survived this killing that we had. Some people referred to it as that thing. But we're talking about the Great Depression, when cotton went from 50 cents a pound to 5 cents a pound. Charlie Clark, my grandfather, felt sure cotton was going back to the price it was in World War II, namely 50 cents a pound. And it did, but it went to 0.05 cents a pound. And he was in pretty good financial conditions until this long position he was in on cotton went down to 5 cents, and he lost his stock in the People's Bank. He lost his stock in the Columbia Land and Timber Company. And fortunately, his brother, who had paid his margin calls, wound up with his bank stock and his Columbia Land and Timber Company stock. And his family became large owners of the People's Bank. And fortunately, my people, the Finchers, were in good grace with him, and he pretty well gave his proxy to the people that were left on the scene, namely my grandfather, my father. And in 1950, my father was able to sell him to not sell. He didn't want to have to pay the taxes. He was a skin specialist in Evanston, Illinois. And he said, well, Herbert, if you can get me some good paying stock, that'll pay more than the bank stock does, I'll swap you my bank stock for the stock in that company. It turned out to be Ritchie Grocery Company was the company that satisfied to make the deal. And my father wound up with a controlling interest in the bank in 1954.